The great god Apollo has promised to follow Cyparissus, still crying. His stag was reclining in shade, the sun shining, moments later lay dying. He'd practiced his javelin, and as it was travelling, life was unravelling. I hugged him one evening, wholly believing. The very next morning I saw he was swarming with ants, their obsession to gather his resin. You'd have to be clever to match their endeavour. You'd probably never. I thought I'd move slowly at Camposivoli, but now I'm not stalling. I've found my true calling, to honour the past. Home at last. What's someone called Duncan Gillis Maclaurin doing in Denmark, you may well ask. I've always found deciphering foreign languages an enjoyable task. At 23, I met a student, a Dane, Anne Bilde. She was imprudent, sharing my sleeping bag out on a hill in Italy. I love her still. She thought it would be rewarding, especially for the neophytes, if I could break the code and write about my memories of boarding. I'm dedicating this to Anne, my angel and my biggest fan. I landed in Glasgow on the 22nd of June 1962. My father felt the future beckoned and signed me up for the white and blue of Trinity College Glenalmond, the bastard. Perhaps he was completely plastered? And then he wouldn't rest until the flag was flying above the mill. It's the day of romantic exaltation, according to my almanac. No looking ahead and no looking back. I don't need no education. My alma mater's the sun and moon. I'm guaranteed to play the buffoon. Aged only 4, I saw this blackbird lying in a flower bed. I didn't think that it was backward, just knew at once that it was dead. Unaware the ancient Roman would see it as an evil omen, I felt its death was unbeknown to everyone but me alone, waiting for my friend in silence outside his house in Bridge of Weir. Suddenly he'd disappear, moving to the Channel Islands. 15 years later, our paths crossed, but the one we'd shared, we'd kinda lost. A Danish au pair I didn't remember, I was only a 5-year-old, visited us one day in September. We'd been buddies, I was told, so we were left alone together. It was awkward. She asked me whether I'd like to learn a nursery rhyme in Danish. Perhaps another time, I said, while reaching for a sandwich. I've learnt that recently in Dutch. And when will I ever be needing such a minor European language? Whenever hubris has its say, Nemesis won't be far away. They didn't want an altercation and waited till we were out of town. Mummy told us outside the station our Labrador had been put down. A classic case of sly deflection, we understood in retrospection. Apparently, poor Gail had got a taste for blood and had to be shot. Funny the way there's no deleting events committed to memory. Friday the 13th must be what 6-year-old me is still repeating. She could have tossed a hand grenade. I felt so bitter, so fucking betrayed. Whenever you see a wasp, said Mummy, just don't move. So I obeyed. I didn't want to be a dummy, and did her bidding unafraid, even when a wasp was crawling over my lips, rather enthralling for my 3 sisters and my mum. They nearly clapped. I wasn't dumb. We'd find these guidelines needed improving when Manda then upset their nest. Had Mum not come at her request to rescue Barbie, who stood unmoving, Barbie wouldn't be here today. It's sometimes right to disobey. Part of the thinking behind the summer cottage they built above Kenmore was having somewhere I could come, a halfway house worth dying for, on those occasions that I'd sally forth from Perthshire's coastal valley, my father anxious since my birth for me to board at schools near Perth. Then they wanted my portrait painted in central Glasgow before I went to boarding school. 3 days misspent. We never even got acquainted. His studio was as cold as heck. I'm only wearing a polo neck. Occasionally, Daddy and Mummy would have an argument over lunch. The tension settled in my tummy like I'd been given a sucker punch. My sanctuary was the Red Room, not the bunk in my own bedroom. My parents learnt they shouldn't fight while I was present. That was all right. Except it became their default setting not to tell me anything I might have trouble stomaching. And all the while they were forgetting that grasping the nettle works a treat. Instead, they both admitted defeat. Now I was 8, I started attending my father's prep school, Ardvrek, in Crieff, and so began a never-ending exercise in shouldering grief. The exeat I felt like flouting came twice a term, a 6-hour outing, barely enough to let off steam. It passed as swiftly as a dream. Exeat over, I just sat staring at my mother at Kenmore, a silent cry she couldn't ignore. She understood I was declaring she was the only hope I had, but didn't dare defy my dad. Later that term, I tried recalling my mother's face, to no avail. I guess I'd found it quite appalling she'd wanted me to stay in jail. Perhaps I'd suffered from delusion in reaching this bizarre conclusion, but how could she reject her child begging for help? I barely smiled the next 10 years upon returning home again. Not home for me, but she pretended not to see the broken bridges I was burning. They spent a fortune on Ardvrek and harvested a bleeding wreck. I'd quickly learnt since my arrival, where all I had to do was sit, that boarding school was about survival. My personality was split. One part of me was proud Narcissus, the other part poor Cyparissus. I watched them wage eternal war, not sure who I was rooting for. I wonder now what kind of flower Ovid would say I might become. A dandelion. Certainly some perennial with healing power, a hardy sort, hard to keep down, and always happy to play the clown. You've probably been able to guess it. I was precocious as a kid. No misadventure could suppress it, no shock or setback ever did. Already the youngest, I soon got promoted to the next level and promptly devoted myself to becoming number 1, or more precisely, second to none. I certainly thrived on competition, and in the summer exams came first. I had an almost insatiable thirst for knowledge, coupled with naked ambition, excelling at sports, bridge and chess. Emotionally, I was a mess. My dad cajoled me into learning chess at 5 and bridge at 6. I wasn't very long in turning all his knowledge into tricks. At bridge at the heads then, this boy wonder made an elementary blunder. His daughter, Kirsty, asked upstairs, "Perhaps you'd like to fetch some chairs?" "We wouldn't like to," Duncan sniggered, "but I suppose we'll have to." My peers clearly couldn't believe their ears. Unsurprisingly, Kirsty was triggered. "How dare you be so impolite?" No brownie points for being right. Somebody must have heard me singing, 'cause Fiddermans asked me to join the choir. And instantly my ears start ringing, my aching heart is set on fire. I accept his offer in jubilation without a second's hesitation. Intuitively, I know my voice is my great gift. I have no choice. Come autumn, he'll attempt to teach me how to play the violin. My mother wants me to begin. But ultimately, he'll beseech me to tackle the trombone instead. Mummy's not pleased, it must be said. Mr. Household, my English teacher, reads compositions aloud in class. More often than not, it's mine that feature. He shows us Larkin's piece, At Grass. Because of the poem's formal diction, I, accustomed to modern fiction, assume it must be rather old. When it was written, we're not told. The enjambment of the penultimate stanza, they have slipped their names and stand, astonishes me. It's sleight of hand, an elegiac extravaganza. Later I'd learn it was still quite new, that late afternoon in 72. A huge Free Scotland's just been painted up on a crag out in the sticks. It stumps me, as I'm not acquainted with bloody 1746, or any of Scotland's background story, having been raised on Jackanory. Practiced now in wearing a mask, I sense it's wisest not to ask, because it's Daddy who's the driver, and he's a very important man, struggling through the best he can, himself a boarding school survivor. Deep down, I somehow understand I'm growing up in a foreign land. Later, I'd read about the spider Robert the Bruce observed in a cave and sympathize with this outsider, seeing that fortune favors the brave. I'd learn to cope, be self-reliant, in many ways become a giant. Courage was never something I'd lack. I always felt that I'd bounce back. Thanks to my dad's indoctrination over the chessboard, he'd reply to danger with never say die, say why, then find a brilliant refutation. Quite a motto. His other one was kiss, keep it simple, son. The head, Ted Foster, was a tyrant, forever putting me in my place. Perhaps it was a job requirement. Perhaps he didn't like my face. But anyway, one summer morning, for no good reason, without warning, he moved me to the senior dorm. The reception there was very warm. They flogged me with their towels, then planted nettles in my apple pie bed and in my slippers. Their bloodlust fed on hearing I was disenchanted. At 21, I'd take revenge by dropping acid at Stonehenge.